The air inside the courtroom was thick, heavy with murmurs, quiet scoffs, and the unshakable weight of assumption. Every eye was fixed on the defendant, a young man barely old enough to vote, standing at the defense table like he had already lost. Nathan Cole, 19 years old, charged with grand theft auto and resisting arrest. To the judge, the jury, and the audience in the gallery, he was just another reckless kid who made a bad decision. Judge Malcolm Pierce adjusted his glasses, leaning back in his chair, lips curling into something between a smirk and a sigh. "You think this is a game, son?" His voice was thick with condescension, the kind that made it clear. This wasn't about justice. This was about putting another statistic behind bars. The courtroom chuckled. The bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor. Everyone seemed to be in on the joke. Everyone except Nathan. But Nathan didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He had been preparing for this moment his whole life, even if he never planned on standing here as a defendant. Because what they didn't know was that Nathan Cole wasn't just another kid in trouble. He was about to tear this case apart, piece by piece, argument by argument, until the entire courtroom was forced to see the truth. And when it was over, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. If you think this is just another courtroom drama, think again. Stay until the end, because what happens next will leave you speechless. And if you believe in justice, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We've got more stories that will make you question everything. Judge Pierce sighed, tapping his fingers against the polished wood of his bench. "Let's make this quick," he muttered. "I've got a golf game at 2. Laughter rippled through the room. The prosecutor, Adam Whitmore, smirked as he straightened his tie, already moving with the confidence of a man who had won before the trial even began. He stepped forward, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Nathan Cole, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6, reported missing just hours before his arrest. His fingerprints, found on the steering wheel. His reaction when police arrived. He ran. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Nathan could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken verdict already forming in their minds. He was young. He was black. He had been found near the stolen car. That was enough for them. Judge Pierce glanced at Nathan over the rim of his glasses. "Well?" he asked, his tone dripping with disinterest. "That sounds pretty open and shut to me." Nathan stood still, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. He had studied this exact moment. Not in this courtroom, not in this case, but in 100 others just like it. Cases where evidence was assumed to be undeniable, where the accused were treated as guilty before they even opened their mouths. His attorney, a weary-looking public defender named Lisa Thornton, hesitated before clearing her throat. "Your Honor, my client." Nathan placed a hand on her arm. A silent request. A decision. She met his gaze, unsure, then nodded and sat back down. Nathan stepped forward. "I'll be representing myself," he said, his voice steady. The room fell silent. Judge Pierce blinked, then let out a short, amused breath. "You'll what?" "I'll be defending myself." The prosecutor scoffed. A few chuckles slipped through the gallery. A teenager thinking he could outmaneuver an experienced legal system? It was absurd. But Nathan wasn't laughing. He had spent years watching trials, memorizing case law, studying the tactics of prosecutors who twisted facts into convictions. He knew how this game was played. And now, for the first time, the courtroom would learn that he wasn't just another kid in trouble. He was their worst nightmare, a defendant who actually knew the law. The laughter faded, but the smug disbelief lingered in the judge's eyes. "Son, this isn't a high school debate club. You really think you can go up against the prosecution on your own?" Nathan met his gaze, unwavering. "I don't think, Your Honor." "I know." Judge Pierce exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Fine, let's hear it. Nathan took a slow step forward, hands still in his pockets. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable, then turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Whitmore, you stated that Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested. Is that correct? Whitmore barely looked up from his notes. That's right. Nathan tilted his head slightly. And that testimony is in his official report. Of course it is, Whitmore replied, exasperated. Nathan nodded, then turned to Judge Pierce. Your Honor, I move to dismiss Officer Ruiz's testimony as evidence. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge frowned. On what grounds? Nathan pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecution's table. Because Officer Ruiz wasn't even on duty when the chase began. Silence. Whitmore's smirk flickered. What? Nathan took another step forward. If the court allows me, I'd like to submit a request to verify Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. His report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, but if we check his location history, he let the words hang in the air. I have a feeling it won't match. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Judge Pierce turned to Whitmore. Counselor, does the prosecution have any issue with verifying the officer's GPS logs? For the first time, Whitmore hesitated. And the moment he did, Nathan knew. He had him. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. And most importantly, the judge noticed. Whitmore cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. No objections, Your Honor. But the shift had already begun. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom was no longer amused. The weight in the air had changed. What once felt like an inevitable conviction now felt uncertain, shaky. Nathan could see it in the way Whitmore shuffled his papers, how the judge's fingers tensed against his gavel. But he wasn't done. Whitmore cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Regardless of the officer's testimony, the fact remains. Nathan Cole's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. Nathan gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. That's true. The gallery murmured. Had he just admitted guilt? Nathan took a step closer to the jury, locking eyes with them one by one. The prosecution wants you to believe that because my fingerprints were in the car, I must have stolen it. But let's think about that for a second. His voice was calm, measured. He wasn't just talking. He was leading them somewhere. Imagine you walk into a clothing store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back and leave. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that exact jacket. Now, your fingerprints are on it. Does that mean you stole it? A flicker of recognition crossed the faces of the jury. A few exchanged glances. A woman in the second row shifted uncomfortably. Nathan didn't let them recover. The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. I was inside that store with 3 friends. And yes, when we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. It was a dumb moment of curiosity. But I didn't take the car. I didn't drive it. I didn't steal anything from inside. He let that sit for a second before his voice cut through the tension like a blade. So I ask you, does touching something make you a criminal? The room was dead silent. Even Whitmore's confidence had started to crack. Nathan turned to the judge. Your Honor, was the forensic specialist from this case subpoenaed to testify? Judge Pierce blinked, caught off guard. He glanced at Whitmore, who hesitated before answering. No. Nathan's lips pressed together. So let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to try and convict me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual expert who processed that evidence. He folded his arms. No chance for me to cross-examine, ask about the chain of custody, or challenge the accuracy of the analysis. Whitmore's jaw clenched. He had no response. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. The tension was thick, enough to choke on. Nathan had turned the state's case into a series of unanswered questions. And if you're watching this right now, you have to ask yourself, how many times has this happened before? How many innocent people have been convicted because no one bothered to question the system? If this moment made you think, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. Should evidence be enough, or should it always be challenged? And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this aren't just rare, they're everywhere. And the more we talk about them, the more people start paying attention. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Judge Pierce rubbed his temple, exhaling slowly. Whitmore shifted his weight, gripping the edge of the prosecution's table as if steadying himself. But Nathan wasn't finished. He took a slow breath, his voice controlled but firm. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle." Judge Pierce frowned. "The owner?" Nathan nodded. "Yes. Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, gave a statement to the police the night his car was taken." He turned to Whitmore, his gaze sharp. "Do you recall what Mr. Whitaker told officers?" Whitmore's face was tight. He knew exactly what was coming. Nathan didn't wait for him to answer. He pulled a printed transcript from his file and read aloud. "I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs. Someone in the back let out a sharp exhale. Nathan held the paper up. "This is from the original police report. The same report the prosecution conveniently never mentioned." Whitmore stepped forward, his voice rising. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was found in possession of the vehicle." "No," Nathan interrupted, his voice cutting through the noise. "I wasn't." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan turned back to the jury, his expression unreadable. "I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was abandoned. I wasn't inside it. I wasn't near it. I wasn't running from anything." He let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "The only thing tying me to this case is bad police work and assumptions." Judge Pierce's expression darkened. He turned to Whitmore. "Counselor, why was this statement not included in the prosecution's filings?" Whitmore opened his mouth, then closed it. No excuses left. The case was unraveling, fast, and everyone in the room knew it. Judge Pierce exhaled, his fingers tightening around his gavel. The weight of the case, of its failures, its shortcuts, its unchecked bias, settled over the room like a storm cloud. Whitmore straightened his tie, trying to salvage control. "Your Honor, regardless of witness statements, the fact remains. Officers pursued and arrested the defendant in connection with this stolen vehicle. That alone justifies—" Nathan's voice cut through, steady as steel. "Justifies what? Exactly?" Whitmore hesitated. Nathan took a slow step forward, his presence filling the room. "Justifies ignoring exculpatory evidence? Justifies pinning a crime on someone who doesn't even match the suspect description? Justifies arresting a black teenager simply because he was in the area?" The jury's eyes flickered with realization. Nathan turned to Judge Pierce. "Your Honor, the prosecution has failed to provide credible evidence linking me to this crime. The officer's testimony is unreliable. The forensic evidence is incomplete. And now, we have a direct statement from the vehicle's owner contradicting their entire case." His voice was calm, deliberate. "With all due respect, there is no case." A heavy silence hung in the air. Judge Pierce's jaw tightened. He looked at Whitmore, then at the jury, then finally at Nathan. His fingers hovered over his gavel before he spoke, his voice quieter now. "Case dismissed." For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, in disbelief. The other half sat in stunned silence. Reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks. A bailiff shifted uncomfortably by the door. Whitmore stood frozen, His face flushed, his career-defining case crumbling in real time. Nathan didn't move right away. He let the moment settle, let the reality sink in for everyone else. Judge Pierce studied him, something unreadable in his expression. And then, just as Nathan turned to leave, the judge spoke again. "Mr. Cole." Nathan stopped but didn't turn around. There was a pause. Then, the judge sighed. "You should consider law school." Nathan smirked. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with voices. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward like weapons. "Nathan, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are you going to do next? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor?" Nathan ignored them, pulling his hoodie over his head. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. It wasn't about humiliating a judge or a prosecutor. It was about something bigger. At the bottom of the steps, his mother, Teresa Cole, stood waiting. Arms crossed, face unreadable. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then, finally, she exhaled and shook her head. "Boy, you scared me half to death." Nathan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She stared at him a second longer, then pulled him into a tight hug. "You always were the stubborn one." The cameras kept flashing, but Nathan wasn't paying attention anymore. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Pierce watched. His posture was different now. The arrogance was gone. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was something else, something closer to reflection. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine. Just another defendant, just another conviction. But now he knew. He'd remember this one. Because Nathan had done something most people never could. He made the system look at itself. And for once, it blinked first. But here's the real question. How many other cases had gone this way? How many people had been convicted not because of evidence, but because of bias, shortcuts, and a system that cared more about closing cases than finding the truth? Nathan had the knowledge to fight back. But what about the ones who didn't? This wasn't just about one case. It was about all of them. And Nathan knew exactly what he had to do next. The next time he stood in a courtroom, he wouldn't be the defendant. He'd be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be the only one. If this story made you think, even for a second, share your thoughts in the comments. How many innocent people have been silenced by a system built to work against them? Let's talk about it. Like, subscribe, and share this video. Because the more we expose these stories, the harder they become to ignore. And remember, justice isn't automatic. Sometimes you have to fight for it.